The fog that night was not merely weather. It was a living thing. It oozed between the iron ribs of Ashford railway station like slow poison, swallowing the yellow glow of the gas lamps one by one until only their halos remained, trembling in the damp air. November the 14th, 1932. The clocks on the main concourse had just shivered past 11:45 when the last London train exhaled a final sigh of steam and rolled southward into the darkness, taking with it the last respectable travelers. What remained were the ghosts of the day. A drunk snoring across 3 seats, a pair of lovers whispering beneath a poster for Brighton, and the echoing footsteps of porters who wanted nothing more than to bolt the doors and go home to cocoa and sleep. Chapter 1. The Midnight Whistle. Tom Wilkins, night porter, aged 43, with a game leg from the Somme and a permanent distrust of the upper classes, was one such man. He moved along platform 3 with his bunch of keys jangling like a jailer's chain, humming Tipperary under his breath out of habit rather than cheer. The tune died the moment he pushed open the smoked glass door of the first-class waiting room. The room was small, oak-paneled, reserved for those who traveled with valises instead of carpet-bags. A coal fire had burned low in the grate, reduced to a sullen red eye. In the winged armchair facing the hearth sat Sir Reginald Hargrove, baronet, steel magnate, and, as the popular press liked to remind its readers, one of the 20 richest men in England. His Homburg hat rested on the occasional table beside him, next to a cup and saucer of Royal Doulton bone china and a silver spirit flask engraved with his initials. His gloved hands lay in his lap as though he had simply decided to take a brief nap after a tiring day. Tom Wilkins knew death when he saw it. He had seen too much of it in Flanders not to recognize the particular stillness that comes when the soul has packed its bags and quietly left the premises. "Sir Reginald?" His voice cracked like a schoolboy's. The only reply was the soft ticking of the mantel clock and the wet drip of fog against the window panes. Wilkins took one step closer, then another. The baronet's head had fallen slightly forward. Beneath the shadow of his trimmed beard, his lips were an alarming shade of violet. A thin line of foam, delicate as lace, edged one corner of his mouth. The eyes, those hard gray eyes that could freeze a boardroom into silence, were half open, staring at nothing with the vague disappointment of a man who had ordered Chateau d'Yquem and been served vinegar. "Christ almighty," Wilkins breathed. He reached out, thought better of it, and snatched his hand back as though the corpse might suddenly sit up and demand an explanation. On the table beside the untouched cup of tea, milky, 2 sugars, exactly as Sir Reginald always took it, lay a telegram. The orange envelope had been torn open with the impatience of a man who hated to be kept waiting, even by bad news. Wilkins, who could no more resist reading than breathing, leaned forward just far enough to make out the printed strips. "Urgent stop, do not drink the tea, stop, trust, no one stop, letter follows." There was no signature. Wilkins felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. He had seen Sir Reginald arrive not 40 minutes earlier, stepping down from the Pullman with that familiar swagger, barking orders at his chauffeur about luggage and timetables. The great man had been alive then, ruddy-cheeked, furious at the world as usual. Now he sat poisoned, and someone had tried to warn him. The porter's mind raced along the well-worn tracks of panic. He lunged for the crimson bell pull beside the fireplace and yanked it as though it were the communication cord on a runaway train. Somewhere deep in the station, a bell clanged in frantic response. While he waited for help that always arrived too late, Wilkins's gaze traveled over the room with the helpless thoroughness of a man who knows he will be questioned later. Nothing appeared disturbed. The window was latched from the inside. The only door opened onto the platform he himself had patrolled not 10 minutes earlier. The fire had settled into ash, but the coals were still warm. On the rug, almost invisible against the crimson and blue pattern, lay a single mother-of-pearl button. Wilkins bent stiffly and picked it up. Lady's glove button, he thought. Small. Expensive. He slipped it into his waistcoat pocket just as the station master, Mr. Entwistle, burst in with 2 constables at his heels. Good God! Entwistle's pince-nez slipped from his nose. Is that... Sir Reginald Hargrove, Wilkins confirmed, surprised at the steadiness of his own voice. Dead as mutton, sir. Poison, if I'm any judge. One of the constables, a young man with the pink cheeks of inexperience, went greener than the Southern Railway livery. The other, older and phlegmatic, knelt beside the body and sniffed the teacup with professional caution. Cyanide, he announced after a moment. No mistaking that smell. Bitter almonds. Entwistle found his voice. Lock every exit. No one leaves the station. Wilkins, you discovered him? Yes, sir. Doing my rounds like always. See anyone? Hear anything? Wilkins hesitated. There had been that shadow, tall, indistinct, slipping between the luggage vans perhaps 20 minutes earlier. Or had it been the fog playing tricks? He decided not to mention it yet. Only the usual, sir. Drunk in the 3rd class. Couple of porters having a fag round the back. Entwistle turned to the constables. Telephone Scotland Yard, and someone find Lady Eleanor Hargrove. She was due to meet her husband off the boat train from Dover. She'll need to be told. Wilkins felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the night air. Lady Eleanor, beautiful, icy, rumored to have taken a lover half her husband's age. The newspapers would feast on this for months. Outside on the platform, the foghorns of distant ships moaned across the marshes, sounding for all the world like lost souls. The station clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing down empty corridors. Somewhere a signal arm clanked, though no train was due for hours. Tom Wilkins stood in the doorway of the waiting room, clutching the mother-of-pearl button in his pocket, and felt the old familiar chill of the trenches settle between his shoulder blades. He had survived 4 years of war only to walk straight into a murder that would make headlines from London to Bombay. And somewhere in the swirling fog, he was suddenly certain the killer was still watching. Far away in his flat above a bakery in Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat bolt upright in bed, awakened by no sound yet suddenly inexplicably alert. He glanced at the luminous dial of his bedside clock, 12:01. A tiny frown creased his forehead. Somewhere, a crime of exquisite precision was taking place, and the little Belgian felt the unmistakable prickle that told him his holiday was over before it had properly begun. He reached for the telephone. In Ashford, the station loudspeaker crackled to life with the voice of the night announcer. Usually reserved for delayed trains and lost children. Would all passengers please remain calm? The station is temporarily closed owing to an incident. Police are on the premises. Do not attempt to leave. The fog pressed closer, as though eager to listen. And in the first-class waiting room, Sir Reginald Hargrove sat alone with his cold tea and his secrets, waiting for the greatest detective in Europe to come and explain why he had to die. Chapter 2. The inspector's arrival. Dawn came late to Ashford that morning, a thin, reluctant light that struggled through the fog like a debtor through a crowd of creditors. By 6:30, the station was no longer a place of transit but a crime scene. Constables in greatcoats stood at every gate, their breath pluming white, while photographers' magnesium flashes lit the waiting room in brief, ghastly daylight. Inspector Japp arrived on the milk train from Charing Cross, grumbling before he had even stepped onto the platform. He hated the country, hated fog, and most of all hated being dragged out of London for a corpse that had the bad manners to belong to a baronet. A sergeant met him with a salute and a thermos of railway tea strong enough to float a battleship. Morning, sir. Victim Sir Reginald Hargrove. Poisoned. Cyanide in the tea, looks like. Discovered just after midnight by the night porter. Jap took the tea, grimaced, and swallowed half of it anyway. Hargrove of Hargrove Steel, the one who bought half of Sheffield last year and put the other half out of work? The very same. Jap gave a low whistle. Then we're in for a treat. The yard switchboard will be red hot by 9 o'clock. Press, politicians, and probably the Home Secretary wanting to know why we haven't hanged someone already. He strode toward the waiting room, boots ringing on wet flagstones. Inside, the body had not been moved. A police surgeon was completing his examination beneath the unforgiving glare of arc lamps borrowed from the signal box. Time of death, Jap barked. Between 11:40 and midnight, give or take 5 minutes either side, the surgeon replied, snapping his bag shut. Potassium cyanide, almost certainly administered in the tea, very rapid. He'd have been dead before the cup left his hand. Jap bent over the table. The cup still held perhaps 2 mouthfuls of milky liquid. A faint, sickly sweet odor of almonds clung to it. On the saucer lay a silver spoon, perfectly aligned, the way a man of precise habits would leave it. Beside the cup, the torn telegram and the spirit flask, untouched. Telegram's interesting, the sergeant offered, handing over the orange strips now protected in a celluloid envelope. No signature, posted in London yesterday afternoon. Someone knew he was going to drink that tea. Or hoped he would, Jap corrected. We need the original envelope. Might have fingerprints. And find out who was on duty in the refreshment room last night. He turned to the body. Sir Reginald's face, even in death, carried the arrogance of a man who had never been refused anything for very long. The lips were blue, the eyes half-lidded, the beard impeccably trimmed. One gloved hand still loosely clutched the arm of the chair. The other rested in his lap, fingers curled as though he had been about to make a point in some eternal boardroom argument. Jap noticed something else. On the left glove, the middle finger was slightly torn, a small triangular rent no more than 1/4 of an inch. Fresh. Important? Perhaps. The station master, Mr. Entwistle, hovered anxiously in the doorway. Inspector, Lady Eleanor Hargrove, has arrived. She came down from town on the first train. She's distraught, naturally. Naturally, Jap echoed dryly. Where is she? In my office, with her maid and rather a lot of smelling salts. Keep her there for now. Anyone else we should know about? Entwistle lowered his voice. Sir Reginald's business partner, Mr. Victor Langston, telephoned from the Ashford Royal Hotel not 20 minutes ago. Said he'd heard rumors and was coming at once. And there's a young woman, secretary I think, staying at the same hotel. Miss Clara Beaumont. She was seen pacing the platform after the last train left. Jap's eyebrows rose. Busy little station for a November night. Right. Sergeant, I want statements from every porter, every refreshment room girl, every passenger who changed trains after 10 o'clock. And find out if anyone sold cyanide to a gentleman with a beard and a title, or without one. He stepped out onto the platform. The fog was lifting in patches, revealing the long, gleaming rails stretching away into nothing. A signalman high in his box watched like a lonely god. Somewhere a locomotive whistled, mournful and far off. Tom Wilkins was sitting on a luggage trolley, smoking a woodbine with the concentration of a man trying to forget what he had seen. You're the one who found him? Jap asked without preamble. Wilkins knocked ash from his cigarette. That's me, Governor, doing my rounds, same as every night. Notice anything odd before you went in? Anyone hanging about? Wilkins hesitated a fraction too long. Fog plays tricks, don't it? Thought I saw someone near the luggage vans, tallish, wearing a long coat. Could have been anyone. Could have been no one. Jap fixed him with a stare that had loosened tighter tongues than Wilkins. You'll do better than that when we get you to the station, my lad. Pockets. Wilkins sighed, reached into his waistcoat and produced the mother-of-pearl button. Found it on the rug. Didn't think it was right to leave it. Jap took it between thumb and forefinger, turning it to the light. Small, delicate, unmistakably feminine. You're a born thief, Wilkins, but maybe an honest one tonight. We'll talk again. As he pocketed the button, a porter came running. Inspector, telephone call from London, most urgent. Gentleman says his name is, Hercule Poirot? Jap rolled his eyes so hard they nearly fell out. Poirot. Of course it's bloody Poirot. Tell him the next train's at 9:15 and not to bring that damned cane. He turned back to the waiting room where Sir Reginald Hargrove sat in state beneath the ticking clock and felt the familiar mixture of irritation and relief. Irritation because the little Belgian would solve it faster and more elegantly than Scotland Yard ever could. Relief for exactly the same reason. Outside, the fog lifted another inch and the day began its slow, inexorable slide toward revelations that none of them, not Jap, not Wilkins, not even the dead man himself, were quite prepared for. Chapter 3. Poirot steps off the train. The 9:15 from Charing Cross drew into Ashford precisely 3 minutes late, which Hercule Poirot considered an insult to civilization itself. He descended from the first-class carriage with the measured dignity of a man who believes punctuality is the politeness of kings and railways the natural enemy of both. His patent leather shoes met the wet platform without a splash. His dove-gray overcoat fell in perfect folds. The famous mustache, impervious to fog and human frailty alike, pointed proudly ahead like the needle of a compass that has already solved the mystery and is merely waiting for the world to catch up. Inspector Jap was waiting beneath the clock, looking as though he had slept in his hat. "Morning, Poirot," he growled. "Trust you had a comfortable night while the rest of us were standing around a corpse." "Mon cher Jap," Poirot replied, eyes twinkling. "The little gray cells require their rest. A tired brain is like a railway buffet sandwich, dry, disappointing, and frequently poisonous." Jap snorted despite himself. "Come and see your corpse, then. He's still sitting up and taking notice in a manner of speaking." They walked the length of platform 1. Constables stiffened to attention as Poirot passed. Even the pigeons seemed to lower their perpetual cooing in deference. The fog had thinned to a pale gauze, allowing weak sunlight to glaze the rails and turn every puddle into a mirror. Poirot paused to study the station's facade, neo-Gothic, over-ornamented, the architectural equivalent of a man who wears too many rings, and gave a small, satisfied nod. Order imposed upon chaos, he approved. Inside the first-class waiting room, the atmosphere was colder than the November air outside. Sir Reginald Hargrove had not improved with keeping. Rigor mortis had set his jaw in an expression of permanent disapproval, as though even death had failed to meet his standards. Poirot circled the chair slowly, hands clasped behind his back, head tilted like a fastidious bird. "Observe, Jap, the posture is excellent. The spine straight, the hands relaxed yet not sprawling. A man who dies of cyanide collapses, he convulses. Yet Sir Reginald sits as though merely waiting for a tardy servant. Curious." "He was a tidy sort," Jap offered. "No, no, mon ami. Tidiness is not the same as composure in extremis. Someone arranged him thus after death. A small adjustment, perhaps only the settling of the head, but deliberate." Poirot's gaze flicked to the teacup. "And the cup has been moved. See the faint ring on the table. It was originally closer to the telegram. Someone wished us to notice the warning too quickly." He bent to examine the torn glove finger Jap had noticed earlier. "Ah, the tear is on the left hand, yet Sir Reginald was right-handed. One does not tear the glove of the idle hand when lifting a cup in haste. Therefore the tear occurred earlier, during a struggle perhaps, or when the glove brushed something sharp." His eyes gleamed. We must discover where Sir Reginald was before he entered this room. Lady Eleanor Hargrove was summoned next. She entered on the arm of her maid, veiled in black crepe, upright as a blade of steel. Grief had not softened her. If anything, it had honed the famous cheekbones to arctic sharpness. "Monsieur Poirot," she said in a voice like cut crystal, "my husband's solicitor assured me you were the only man in Europe capable of resolving this horror discreetly." "Discretion, madame, is my watchword," Poirot replied with a bow that managed to be both courtly and appraising. "Tell me, when did you last see Sir Reginald alive?" "Yesterday afternoon at our house in Belgravia. We quarreled. He wished to travel alone to Paris on urgent business. I wished to accompany him. He left in anger at 4 o'clock. I followed by the night boat train, intending to meet him here at Dover the morning after next and effect a reconciliation. Instead..." Her voice did not break. It simply stopped, as though someone had closed a door. Poirot studied her gloved hands. "You are wearing mourning gloves of the finest kid, madame. Yet the button discovered on the rug is mother of pearl, smaller from a day glove. You did not lose it? I did not." The answer came too swiftly. Poirot merely smiled and turned to the maid, a trembling girl who looked ready to dissolve into tears. "And you, mademoiselle? Did you accompany your mistress to the station last evening?" "No, sir. I stayed to pack." "Bon. Then we have established that Lady Eleanor has no button missing. A small point, but the small points are the ones that hang murderers." Lady Eleanor's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Victor Langston arrived next, unannounced and unescorted, striding in as though he still owned half the steelworks that now belonged to the widow. Tall, dark, 38, and aware of all three advantages. "Inspector, Monsieur Poirot." He shook hands with the confidence of a man who believed charm was merely another form of currency. "Reginald was more than a partner. He was almost a father to me. If there is anything I can..." "You can tell me," Poirot interrupted gently, "why your firm's share price rose 7 points this morning on the news of Sir Reginald's death." Langston's smile froze. "Market sentiment is a fickle thing." "Indeed. Almost as fickle as alibis. You were, I am told, in London last evening?" "At my club until 11, then the Savoy Grill until 1. Dozens of witnesses." "Excellent," Poirot beamed. "A good alibi is like a good tailor. It should fit perfectly at every seam. We shall examine the stitching later." As Langston left, Poirot stooped to the rug and, with the delicacy of a watchmaker, lifted something almost invisible with a pair of tweezers. A single strand of fair hair, long and fine, caught on the rough weave. "Interesting," he murmured. Sir Reginald's hair was iron gray. Lady Eleanor's is raven, Mr. Langston's almost black. This hair is pale gold. Japp scratched his head. "Could be from any woman on the train. Or from the woman who arranged the body so neatly after death," Poirot corrected. "Come, mon ami. We have a secretary to interview, a doctor to locate, and a porter whose tongue is considerably looser than his conscience. The train of clues is leaving the station, and Hercule Poirot intends to be aboard." He turned on his heel, coat swirling, and marched toward the station master's office. Behind him, in the silent waiting room, Sir Reginald Hargrove continued his endless wait, lips turning bluer by the minute, as though even in death he were growing impatient for justice. And somewhere in the echoing corridors of Ashford Station, a pale-haired woman checked her reflection in a darkened window and discovered, with a small, sharp intake of breath, that one mother-of-pearl button was missing from her left glove. Chapter 4. The Suspect's Alibis. The station master's office had been commandeered as an interrogation room. A single green-shaded lamp threw a cone of light onto the baize-covered table. Outside the circle of brightness, the room dissolved into tobacco-colored gloom. A coal fire hissed in the grate, but the warmth never reached the corners where suspicion crouched. Hercule Poirot sat at the head of the table like a diminutive chairman of the board, hands folded over the crook of his cane, green eyes glittering. Inspector Japp leaned against the mantel, arms folded, the very picture of official impatience. Between them, on 5 hard chairs arranged in a half-moon, sat the 5 people who had been closest, geographically or emotionally, to Sir Reginald Hargrove in the last hours of his life. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch until it became uncomfortable, then unbearable. Only when Lady Eleanor gave the smallest, most aristocratic sigh of irritation did he speak. "Mesdames, messieurs, we are here not to accuse, heaven forfend, but to establish truth. Truth is like a timetable. It must be exact, or the entire service descends into chaos. Let us begin." He turned first to Miss Clara Beaumont. The secretary was 26, pale and shaking so violently that the blonde curl escaping her beret trembled like a leaf in a storm. The missing button had not yet been mentioned, but she kept flexing the fingers of her left glove as though counting the spaces where it should have been. "Mademoiselle, you were Sir Reginald's confidential secretary. You knew his habits, his correspondence, his indiscretions." Clara flushed crimson. "I typed his letters, that is all." "All?" Poirot repeated softly. "Yet you booked a room at the Ashford Royal last night, though your employer was supposedly traveling on to Paris. Why?" He asked me to wait, said he might need papers urgently. Yet he took the 11:07 connection to Dover, alone. Curious." Poirot's gaze flicked to her glove. "And at what hour did you purchase your railway ticket yesterday?" 10:30, perhaps a little after. The clerk will remember I was agitated. Agitated because Sir Reginald had just broken some news? A promise withdrawn, perhaps? Clara's eyes filled with tears. He was going to leave Lady Eleanor, he promised. Then yesterday he laughed and said promises were for little shop girls who believed in fairy tales. I hated him for a moment. Only a moment. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Poirot watched it with scientific interest. Next, Dr. Elias Thorne, the Hargrove family physician, 55, lean with a Scots burr sharp enough to shave with. "Doctor, you prescribed Sir Reginald Digitalis for his heart. You are also conversant with poisons." "Every competent physician is," Thorne replied evenly. "I dined at the George and Dragon until 11:40. The landlord, 2 commercial travelers, and the barmaid will vouch for me. I then walked back to my hotel, alone. And you carry cyanide in your medical bag?" "For the destruction of wasps' nests at the country house," Thorne said with a thin smile. "A solution of 2%. Enough to kill a man, certainly, if one were foolish enough to drink it in tea." Poirot inclined his head. "We shall test the concentration, naturellement." Victor Langston lounged in his chair, legs crossed, attempting nonchalance and almost succeeding. "Monsieur Langston, you quarreled with Sir Reginald last week over the proposed merger with Vickers Armstrong. He intended to sell your joint shares and leave you ruined." "Business," Langston said, shrugging. "Reginald was ruthless, but I'm not a fool. Murder would have achieved nothing. The shares revert to the estate. I was at the Savoy Grill until 1. Ask the head waiter, I signed the bill myself." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "You signed at 1 o'clock, yet the night porter at the Savoy remembers you leaving at 12:20, 40 minutes unaccounted for. Enough time, perhaps, to catch the last train to Ashford?" Langston's smile thinned. "I took a taxi to my flat. The driver will remember I overtipped him." Lady Eleanor spoke for the first time, voice like iced water. "All this is vulgar. My husband was poisoned by someone in this room. I was on the boat train from Victoria, surrounded by witnesses. My motive? I inherit everything. Why kill the goose before the golden egg is fully laid? Precisely, madam, Poirot murmured. Why indeed? Finally, Tom Wilkins was brought in, cap twisting in his hands, the smell of fear stronger than the coal smoke. Wilkins, you discovered the body, yet you were seen loitering near the waiting room at 11:30. Why? Checking doors, sir, part of me round. You told Inspector Japp you saw a tall figure in a long coat. Now you say nothing. Memory improves or worsens? Wilkins swallowed. Might have been a lady, sir. Tallish. Blonde hair under the hat. Thought it was the fog. Clara Beaumont gave a small, choked sound. Poirot rose, walked to the window, and gazed out at the empty platform. When he turned back, his voice was gentle but relentless. Let us construct the evening. Sir Reginald arrives at 11:07, enters the waiting room expecting privacy. Someone joins him, someone he trusts enough to accept a cup of tea. The poison is already in the sugar bowl, or added while he looks away. He drinks. In 30 seconds, he is dead. The murderer then straightens the body, moves the cup to draw attention to the telegram, and departs, losing a button in her haste. He let the silence fall like a headsman's axe. Clara Beaumont stood up so suddenly her chair toppled. I didn't. I couldn't. Yes, I came to the waiting room. I begged him to reconsider. He laughed at me, pushed me away. That must be when the button tore, but he was alive when I left. Alive! She burst into wild sobbing. Lady Eleanor looked at her with icy contempt. Dr. Thorne's expression never changed. Langston lit a cigarette with fingers that did not tremble. Wilkins stared at the floor as though it might open and swallow him. Poirot raised a hand. Calm yourselves. Mademoiselle Beaumont is not the murderer. She has neither the nerve nor the knowledge of poisons, but she has given us a vital truth. Sir Reginald was alive at approximately 11:35. That narrows our window to 25 minutes. He turned to Japp. Inspector, have the sugar from the bowl analyzed immediately, and bring me the railway cloakroom receipts for last night. Somewhere in this station is a suitcase that has not been claimed. It belongs, I think, to the person who intended to leave on the midnight boat train, and was prevented by murder. As Japp hurried out, Poirot allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The little gray cells. They begin to march in formation. But the parade is not yet complete. Outside the window, a distant whistle sounded as the upline Continental Express thundered through without stopping, scattering sparks into the pale morning-like omens. Inside the office, 5 people waited for the next accusation, each certain it would fall on someone else, and each, in the deepest chamber of their hearts, no longer entirely sure. Chapter 5. Red herrings emerge by noon. The fog had burned away entirely, leaving Ashford Station naked under a hard, wintry sun. The crime scene felt different in daylight, smaller, shabbier, almost embarrassed by its own melodrama. Constables yawned at their posts. Reporters prowled the barriers like hungry gulls. A newsreel cameraman tried to bribe Tom Wilkins for a reenactment of the discovery of the body and was sent packing with a flea in his ear. In the station master's office, the atmosphere was no less brittle. A trestle table had been brought in and covered with evidence laid out like a macabre jumble sale. The teacup, the sugar bowl, the torn telegram, the mother-of-pearl button, the silver flask, the strand of pale gold hair in its glassine envelope, and newly arrived from the laboratory a small, stoppered bottle containing the dregs of the tea. Inspector Japp read from a typewritten sheet. Potassium cyanide, high purity, mixed into the sugar, not the tea itself. Whoever did it knew Sir Reginald took exactly 2 lumps and stirred clockwise. That's intimate knowledge. Or simple observation, Poirot murmured. A railway waiting room is a goldfish bowl. One may watch from the platform without ever entering. He turned to the latest arrival. A nervous young clerk from Hargrove's London office, summoned by telegram and still clutching his return ticket as though it might save him. Sir Reginald received a telephone call at 6:15 yesterday evening, the clerk stammered. Wouldn't take it in the secretary's room. Went into his private office and closed the door. When he came out, he was white. Said he had to go to Ashford immediately alone. Told me to burn any letters addressed to him personally. I didn't, of course, thought it odd. He produced a single sheet of lavender notepaper from his breast pocket and laid it on the table as though it were hot. Poirot took it delicately between thumb and forefinger. My darling, if you proceed with the sale, you will destroy us both. Meet me tonight at Ashford. Come alone or the proof goes to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Midnight. Do not fail me. The handwriting was unmistakably feminine, the initial extravagantly looped. Lady Eleanor's gloved hand flew to her throat. That is not my writing. I use black ink and deckle-edged paper. This is common dime store stationery. Yet the initial is yours, Jap pointed out. Or any Eleanor, Ellen, Edith, or Eve in England, she retorted. Victor Langston gave a short, humorless laugh. Reginald had enemies in every boardroom from here to Pittsburgh. Half the widows in Yorkshire probably signed themselves E. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The lavender scent is distinctive. Je reviens worth, 1929 formulation. Expensive. Not every widow can afford it. Clara Beaumont flushed scarlet. The same scent clung faintly to her handkerchief. Poirot let the silence ripen, then changed tack. Monsieur Langston, your alibi. The Savoy bill signed at 1 o'clock. Yet the head waiter now recalls you asked for the bill at 12:18 and paid cash. The signature was added later by a friend who remained behind. You left the restaurant at 12:20, correct? Langston's jaw tightened. I needed air. Walked along the embankment. Alone? Completely. Yet a taxi driver has come forward. Picked up a gentleman answering your description at the Savoy rank at 12:25. Dropped him at Charing Cross in time for the 12:40 to Ashford. The fare was paid with a 10-shilling note still bearing the grease mark of Savoy butter. Langston opened his mouth, closed it again. For the first time the mask slipped, revealing raw fear. Dr. Thorne cleared his throat. If we are confessing discrepancies, I may as well admit mine. I was not at the George and Dragon until 11:40. I arrived at 11:55. The earlier time was optimistic. I had been visiting a patient in the country, a lady. Married, these things happen. Jap's pencil raced across his notebook. Poirot turned to the sugar bowl. And now the most curious discovery. The sugar is laced with cyanide, yes, but also with a trace of powdered digitalis, Sir Reginald's heart medicine. Enough to slow the effect of the poison by perhaps 90 seconds. Why? He looked slowly around the room. To give the murderer time to leave the room and be seen elsewhere before the victim collapsed, he said softly. A refinement almost artistic. Lady Eleanor rose. This is intolerable. My husband is dead and we are all treated as music hall villains. I am returning to the hotel. Poirot bowed. Of course, madame, but first, one tiny experiment. He took a clean spoon, scooped a lump of the poisoned sugar and held it beneath Lady Eleanor's nose. Tell me, madame, do you take sugar in your tea? She recoiled. Never? It ruins the flavor. Yet you knew Sir Reginald took 2 lumps, and you were seen by the refreshment room girl purchasing a packet of lump sugar at 11:15 last night. She remembers because you asked for the kind with the blue wrapper. My husband is particular. Lady Eleanor's face drained of color. I intended to join him later, to surprise him. With sugar laced with his own heart medicine and enough cyanide to kill an ox. A most affectionate surprise. For a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. Then Lady Eleanor laughed, a short metallic sound. You are very clever, Monsieur Poirot, but cleverness is not proof. She swept out, veil fluttering like a battle flag. Japp exhaled. Well, that's her bang to rights, isn't it? Poirot shook his head slowly. Non, mon ami. Too many red herrings swim in these waters. The lavender letter is forged. See the pressure of the pen? Too heavy, the work of someone pressing down to disguise their natural hand. The sugar packet was purchased openly, almost ostentatiously. And the digitalis. That is the touch of someone who wished us to notice the refinement and admire it. He picked up the mother-of-pearl button and turned it so that the light caught the tiny engraved crest. A coronet above the initials CB. Clara Beaumont's button. Clara Beaumont's scent on the letter. Clara Beaumont seen arguing with Sir Reginald at 11:35. Everything points to the poor secretary weeping and terrified, who loved him and was scorned. He smiled without humor. Everything, that is, except logic. A woman who has just poisoned a man does not linger to lose buttons and strands of hair. She flees. Someone wishes us to look at Mademoiselle Beaumont while the true murderer walks free. Japp scratched his head. Then who the devil? A sudden shout from the corridor interrupted him. A constable burst in, flushed and triumphant. Sir! Cloakroom attendant just remembered a brown leather suitcase left just after 11 last night. Labeled Dr. E. Thorne, passenger to Paris. Been sitting there ever since, keys still in the lock. Dr. Thorne rose slowly, face ashen. Poirot's eyes glittered like winter stars. Ah, the parade of red herrings is over. Now perhaps we approach the truth. Outside, the sun climbed higher, merciless on the wet rails, and somewhere in the distance a signal bell clanged twice, clearance for the next train, or warning that the game had changed utterly. Chapter 6. The Hidden Motive. The brown leather suitcase stood on the trestle table like a guilty thing, its brass lock still obediently open. Dr. Elias Thorne's initials were stamped in faded gold beneath the handle. The cloakroom attendant, a boy of 17 who had never before been important in his life, hovered in the doorway, eyes wide with the thrill of having remembered something vital. Poirot did not touch the case at once. He circled it slowly, the way a cat circles a bird with a broken wing. Dr. Thorne, he said at last, voice deceptively mild. You told us you spent last evening at the George and Dragon, then walked to your hotel. Yet here is luggage prepared for a journey to Paris. One does not pack for the continent when one intends merely to dine in Ashford. Thorne Scott's composure cracked only slightly. I often keep a bag ready. Professional habit. One is sometimes called abroad urgently. Indeed, and the ticket in the side pocket, first-class single to Paris via Dover, dated yesterday, is also habit? A muscle jumped in Thorne's cheek. Japp lifted the lid. The contents were meticulously arranged. 2 suits of Harris tweed, a leather dispatch case, shirts folded with military precision, and nestled between layers of tissue, a flat tin box bearing the label potassium cyanide for medical use. Enough, Japp estimated, to poison half the county. Thorne attempted a laugh. As I explained, wasps' nests at the country house. Curious, Poirot interrupted. The seal is broken, and the quantity reduced by approximately 30 grams, the exact amount required to lace a sugar bowl. Silence fell, heavy as wet wool. Poirot lifted out the dispatch case and snapped it open. Inside lay documents, share certificates in the Ashford and Continental Railway Development Syndicate, bearer bonds, and a single sheet of foolscap headed Memorandum of Agreement between Sir R. Hargrove and Dr. E. Thorne. Poirot read aloud, translating the legal jargon into plain cruelty. In short, Sir Reginald had lent the syndicate £250,000 at punitive interest. Last month he called in the loan, knowing the syndicate, chiefly Dr. Thorne, could not repay. Bankruptcy stared the good doctor in the face. Ruin, disgrace, the end of a distinguished career. Thorne's hands clenched on the table edge. He was within his rights. Rights, Poirot repeated softly. A cold word, doctor, yet men have killed for warmer ones. He laid the memorandum down and produced another document, this one crumpled as though it had been crushed in fury. And this, found in Sir Reginald's breast pocket only this morning. A letter from you, dated yesterday. You demanded a meeting at Ashford Station, threatening exposure of certain irregularities in the IOS syndicate accounts. Embezzlement, I believe the word is. Sir Reginald underlined it 3 times. Thorne sat very still. Blackmail is an ugly word, Monsieur Poirot. Murder is uglier. Lady Eleanor, who had been allowed to return, gave a brittle laugh. So the respectable physician is a thief and a poisoner. How very Scottish. Thorne turned on her with sudden venom. And you, madam, are a harlot who sold herself for a title and a fortune. Don't think Reginald's death erases the photographs. The room froze. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Photographs? Thorne realized too late he had said too much. Nothing. A figure of speech. But Poirot was already moving. From the suitcase he drew a small envelope sealed with red wax. Inside were 6 photographic negatives. He held one to the light. Ah, Lady Eleanor and Mr. Victor Langston in a state the French describe as déshabillé, on the terrace of a villa at Cap d'Antibes. Taken, I would say, last July. Sir Reginald paid you, doctor, to obtain these. Thorne said nothing. Japp whistled. So Hargrove was blackmailing his own wife and her lover with pictures supplied by his doctor. That's a pretty kettle of fish. Poirot replaced the negatives carefully. We begin to see the shape of things. Sir Reginald delighted in power. He ruined Langston professionally, Thorne financially, his wife morally, and poor Mademoiselle Beaumont emotionally. A man who collected enemies the way others collect stamps. He turned to Clara Beaumont, who had been sitting white-faced and silent. Mademoiselle, yesterday you told us Sir Reginald laughed at your dreams of marriage. Yet this morning the maid found, hidden in your handbag, a special license and a wedding ring. You still believed he would marry you? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. He said, after Paris, everything would be different. After he had sold the syndicate and ruined Dr. Thorne. After he had crushed Mr. Langston. After he had humiliated his wife one final time. Yes, I see. He paced, small feet soundless on the worn linoleum. But there is one thing that troubles Poirot. The digitalis in the sugar. Why slow the poison? To give the murderer 90 seconds grace, yes. But 90 seconds is also the time it takes to walk from the waiting room to the cloakroom and deposit a suitcase one no longer needs because one no longer intends to flee to Paris. He stopped in front of Thorne. You poisoned the sugar earlier in the evening, doctor, when you claimed to have been visiting your married lady. You then telephoned Sir Reginald using a false voice, perhaps, luring him to Ashford with the forged lavender note. You knew he would stop for tea. He always did on long journeys. You watched from the platform as he entered the waiting room. You waited for him to stir in his 2 lumps. Thorne surged to his feet. This is conjecture, fantasy. Is it? Poirot produced a final item, a brass cloakroom ticket number 217. This was found in the turn-up of your trousers, doctor, for the suitcase now before us, and on the suitcase handle beneath the leather the faintest trace of powdered sugar mixed with digitalis. You brushed against the table as you left. Thorne's face collapsed like wet paper. For a moment it seemed he might confess. Then, with the suddenness of a man who sees one last desperate chance, He lunged for the tin of cyanide. Jap was faster. He caught Thorne's wrist and twisted. The tin clattered to the floor, spilling white crystals like deadly snow. "Elias Thorne," Jap said formally, "I am arresting you for the murder of Sir Reginald Hargrove." But Poirot raised a hand. "Un moment, Inspector, something is not right." He bent and picked up one of the scattered crystals, touching it to his tongue. "Salt," he said quietly. "Table salt. The real cyanide is still in the sugar bowl. This tin was emptied and refilled to create the perfect picture of guilt." He turned slowly, surveying the stunned faces. Someone wished Dr. Thorne to appear the perfect suspect. Motive, means, opportunity, even a suitcase packed for flight. But the true murderer is more subtle. The true murderer knew that Poirot would taste the crystals. The true murderer counted on it. The room seemed to contract around that single, terrible realization. Outside, the station loudspeaker announced the arrival of the 2:15 to Margate, bright and cheerful and utterly indifferent to the fact that somewhere among them the real killer was still breathing free. Chapter 7. Twists in the Fog. A heavy silence settled over the station master's office, thicker than any fog. The spilled salt crystals glittered on the linoleum like frost. Dr. Thorne, half risen, sank back into his chair as though someone had cut his strings. Jap's handcuffs hung unused in his fist. Poirot stood motionless at the center of the room, eyes half closed, the way a pianist pauses before the final resolving chord. "Non," he said at last, almost to himself. "Non, non, non. It is too much and yet not enough. The pieces are all here, but they have been arranged by someone who wishes us to see a picture that is not the true one." He opened his eyes and looked slowly and deliberately at each person in turn. Someone in this room is very clever. Someone else is very fortunate, and someone— His gaze settled on Tom Wilkins, who had been silently sweeping up the salt under Jap's direction. "Someone has been used like a porter's barrow." Wilkins froze, broom in hand. Poirot continued, voice soft but relentless. "The digitalis in the sugar was not to grant the murderer 90 seconds. It was to grant the murderer an alibi. Digitalis slows the heart. In combination with cyanide, it can delay visible convulsions for up to 3 minutes. 3 minutes is enough for a man to walk the length of platform 3, be seen by half a dozen witnesses, and return to the waiting room as though merely checking the fire. He turned to Victor Langston. "Monsieur, you told us you walked along the embankment at 12:20, yet the taxi driver now remembers dropping his fare at Ashford at 12:58. The train from Charing Cross arrived at 12:51. You had 7 minutes. You entered the waiting room, greeted Sir Reginald as a friend. He trusted you, after all. Watched him stir his poisoned tea, chatted for 2 minutes while the digitalis held death at bay, then left. By the time Sir Reginald collapsed, you were buying cigarettes at the kiosk, witnessed by the newspaper boy." Langston's handsome face was suddenly bloodless. "Absurd. I was never on that train." Poirot produced a tiny green ticket from his waistcoat pocket. "Third-class return, Charing Cross to Ashford, found in the lining of your overcoat when you hung it in the cloakroom this morning. The corner is torn exactly where the collector clips it. You forgot to destroy it." Langston opened his mouth, closed it again. Lady Eleanor gave a low, almost admiring laugh. "So the golden boy is the murderer after all. How very Greek." But Poirot shook his head. "Non, madame. Monsieur Langston is guilty of many things, adultery, ambition, perhaps even conspiracy, but not of this murder. Observe." He held up the green ticket. "It is dated yesterday, yes, but the return half is unclipped. Mr. Langston came to Ashford, certainly. Yet he is still here. A murderer does not buy a return ticket when he believes he will flee to the continent." He laid the ticket down like a playing card. "Then who?" Jap exploded. Poirot's gaze moved to Clara Beaumont. The girl was trembling so violently her chair creaked. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "you told us Sir Reginald laughed at you, pushed you away, tore your button. Yet the tear in his glove is on the left hand, the palm. A push with the right hand would tear the right glove. Someone gripped his wrist hard while forcing him to drink. Someone much stronger than you." Clara began to cry silently, tears sliding down her cheeks like rain on a window. Poirot turned at last to Tom Wilkins. "Wilkins, you saw a tall figure in a long coat near the luggage vans. You told Inspector Japp it might have been a lady with blonde hair. Yet when I questioned you, you said nothing of the hair. Why?" Wilkins licked dry lips. "Didn't seem important, sir. Or perhaps because you realized the lady was Miss Beaumont, and you have a soft heart for pretty girls in trouble." Wilkins looked at the floor. Poirot's voice grew stern. "You have been stealing from passengers for years. Small things, a wallet here, a brooch there. Sir Reginald discovered it. He threatened to turn you over to the police unless you performed one small service. Lace the sugar bowl in the first-class waiting room with poison from Dr. Thorne's tin, which you had previously stolen and replaced with salt. You did it yesterday afternoon when the room was empty. You did not know the digitalis had been added separately." Wilkins dropped the broom. It clattered like a gunshot. "I never meant murder," he burst out. "He said it was just to make Sir Reginald ill, give him a fright, so he'd keep quiet about my activities. Said the doctor would be blamed, being as the poison was his. I swear I never knew it would kill him." Japp moved forward, but Poirot stopped him with a glance. "One moment. Wilkins is a tool, not the craftsman. Someone else added the digitalis. Someone who knew Sir Reginald's heart condition intimately. Someone who forged the lavender letter, planted the cloakroom ticket on Langston, hid the real cyanide tin in Thorne's suitcase, and arranged every clue to point away from themselves." He paused. The room was so quiet they could hear the big clock on the platform striking 3. Poirot turned, slowly, inevitably, to Lady Eleanor Hargrove. "Madame," he said almost sorrowfully, "you are the only person whose alibi is perfect. The boat train from Victoria, dozens of witnesses, including the Bishop of Chelmsford, in the next compartment. You never left the train. You could not possibly have been in the waiting room at 12:51. Lady Eleanor inclined her head, regal even now. "Exactly, Monsieur Poirot. I am innocent. Non, madame, you are brilliant." He reached into his pocket and produced a single sheet of paper, thin, official, stamped with the Southern Railway crest. "This is the passenger manifest of the 11:07 from Charing Cross. Lady Eleanor Hargrove is listed as occupying compartment C, first class. Yet the guard remembers distinctly that the compartment was empty until Tunbridge, when a veiled lady in black entered hurriedly. You, madam, traveled on the earlier train, the 10:42, under the name Mrs. Ellis, wearing a blonde wig borrowed from your maid's theatrical cousin. You poisoned the sugar during the stop at Orpington when the waiting room was deserted. You then returned to Tunbridge by motor taxi, rejoined your reserved compartment, and became yourself again. The perfect alibi." He laid the manifest beside the mother-of-pearl button, the forged letter, the green ticket. Everything arranged with the precision of a Swiss watch. Wilkins to administer the poison, Thorne to supply it, Langston to be seen arriving too late. Even poor Clara's heartbreak used as one more false trail. Lady Eleanor's face was marble. "You have no proof." Poirot smiled, small and sad. "I have the wig, madame. Found this morning in the left luggage office, wrapped in a copy of yesterday's Times. Blonde, human hair, with one strand caught in the lining, exactly matching the strand on the waiting room rug. And on the inside band, in indelible ink, your initials, E.H. For the first time, Lady Eleanor's composure cracked. She looked suddenly old. "He was going to divorce me," she said, voice barely audible. "Leave me penniless, married to that little typist after 20 years. I gave him my youth, my name, everything, and he laughed." The room held its breath. Then astonishingly she smiled, cold, magnificent, unrepentant. "Well, Monsieur Poirot," she said, rising, "you have your solution. Do with it what you will." She walked to the door, back straight, veil fluttering like a mourning flag. Jap moved to stop her, but Poirot shook his head. "Let her go, mon ami, for now. Some arrests are made in drawing rooms, not police stations." Outside, the fog was returning, rolling in from the marshes like a tide, and somewhere in its gray embrace a woman who had killed with the elegance of another century walked free for a few hours more. The case was solved, and yet Poirot felt no triumph. Only the old familiar ache of understanding too much about the human heart. Chapter 8. Gathering the Suspects. The light was failing early the way November light does, as though it had somewhere better to be. At 4:30, the first-class waiting room was lit only by the sullen glow of the coal fire and 2 green-shaded police lamps. The chairs had been arranged in a precise semicircle, exactly as they had been the night Sir Reginald died. Even the teacup had been returned to its saucer, the sugar bowl refilled with harmless lumps, the telegram laid beside it like a stage prop. Hercule Poirot stood before the hearth, small and immaculate, hands clasped behind his back. The famous moustache seemed larger in the firelight, the eyes brighter, the voice when it came, quiet but carrying to every corner. "Mesdames et messieurs, we return to the scene of the crime. Tonight the drama reaches its final act. All of you have lied, some out of fear, some out of love, some out of that coldest passion, hatred. But only one of you is the architect of murder." They were all present. Lady Eleanor, veiled and rigid as a statue in black marble. Victor Langston, pale but composed, a fresh cigarette burning between his fingers. Dr. Elias Thorne, hollow-eyed, wrists already marked by the memory of handcuffs that had not yet been applied. Clara Beaumont, small and shivering in a coat 2 sizes too large, borrowed from the station lost property room. Tom Wilkins, cap in hand, standing awkwardly by the door as though ready to bolt. Inspector Japp leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching Poirot the way a terrier watches a rat hole. Poirot began to walk, slowly along the semicircle. "We have had many pretty pictures painted for us. Dr. Thorne with his convenient suitcase of cyanide. Mr. Langston with his torn ticket and midnight dash from the Savoy. Poor Mademoiselle Beaumont with her broken heart and missing button. Wilkins the thief who thought he was only making a man sick. And always, always Lady Eleanor with her perfect alibi on the boat train." He stopped in front of the teacup. Yet one detail has troubled Poirot from the beginning. The body. Sir Reginald did not slump. He did not fall forward. He sat upright, almost dignified. Cyanide does not permit dignity. It permits only agony. Someone arranged him after death. Someone with the strength to lift a heavy man and the coolness to do it while the clock ticked and the station slept. He turned. Someone who knew exactly how long the digitalis would delay the convulsions. Someone who had access to Sir Reginald's medical records. Someone who could walk into this room at 12 minutes past midnight, certain that no one would challenge him. He faced Dr. Thorne. "Doctor, you told us you dined at the George and Dragon until 11:55. The landlord confirms you left at 11:40. Where were you for those missing 15 minutes? Thorne's voice was hoarse. Walking. Thinking. Thinking of the £250,000 you embezzled from the railway syndicate. Thinking how Sir Reginald intended to expose you at the board meeting tomorrow. You came here, Doctor. You entered this room at 11:50. Sir Reginald greeted you. He trusted his physician. You offered to prepare him a cup of tea for his nerves. You added the poisoned sugar. You waited. You watched him drink. And when he began to choke, you held him upright, held his wrists so tightly that the left glove tore, until he died. Thorne took one step back. You cannot prove. I can. Poirot produced a small glass vial. This morning, the police surgeon removed fibers from beneath Sir Reginald's fingernails. Harris tweed, the exact shade of your traveling suit, doctor. And on the cuff of that suit found in your hotel room, a single spot of Sir Reginald's blood. Type O. Rare. Thorne's knees buckled. He would have fallen had Japp not caught him. But the suitcase, Thorne whispered. Planted, Poirot said simply. By the same person who planted the forged lavender letter, the torn ticket on Langston, the blonde wig. All to create confusion, all to give you, doctor, every appearance of guilt while the real murderer walked free. He turned now to Lady Eleanor. Madam, you are innocent of the act, but not of the intent. You discovered the embezzlement. You persuaded Thorne that Sir Reginald meant to ruin him. You supplied the digitalis from your own medicine cabinet. Your late mother suffered the same heart condition. You convinced Thorne that if Sir Reginald died suddenly, the scandal would die with him. You even provided the perfect distraction, your own apparent motive and unbreakable alibi. Lady Eleanor's voice was ice. Conjecture. Non, confession. Poirot produced a sheet of heavy cream notepaper. This morning, while you believed yourself alone in the hotel lounge, you wrote this letter to your solicitor. If anything should happen to me, the enclosed documents will prove Dr. Thorne acted alone. You intended to sacrifice him completely. The maid saw you seal it. She is a policeman's daughter. She brought it straight to Inspector Japp. Lady Eleanor stared at the letter as though it were a snake. Poirot's voice softened. You hated your husband, madame, but you did not kill him. Dr. Thorne did. You merely loaded the gun. He turned finally to the others. Monsieur Langston, you are guilty of adultery and attempted fraud, but not murder. Mademoiselle Beaumont, you are guilty of nothing but loving a man who did not deserve it. Wilkins, you will face charges of theft and accessory, but not murder. He looked at Thorne, slumped now in Japp's grip. Doctor, the jury will decide your fate. But know this. You killed not just a tyrant, but the last shred of your own honor. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the fog had returned thicker than ever, swallowing the platforms, the signals, the world. Japp snapped the handcuffs on Thorne's wrists. The metallic click echoed like a judge's gavel. Poirot allowed himself one small sigh. It is finished. The little gray cells have spoken. Let us leave this room to its ghosts. He walked to the door, paused, and looked back once more at the chair where Sir Reginald Hargrove had died. Au revoir, mon vieux, he murmured. You collected enemies the way other men collect fine wines. In the end, one of them uncorked you. Then he stepped out into the fog, coat buttoned to the throat, already thinking of hot chocolate and a warm fire in London. Behind him, the waiting room door closed with the soft finality of a coffin lid. Chapter 9. The deduction unfolds. The waiting room fire had sunk to a handful of red embers, yet the air felt hotter than at any time that day. Every lamp seemed to burn brighter, as though the room itself understood that this was the final unmasking. Dr. Elias Thorne stood between two constables, wrists cuffed, face the color of old parchment. The others, Lady Eleanor, Langston, Clara, Wilkins, remained seated, frozen in their half-circle, breathing shallowly, like people waiting for a guillotine to drop. Hercule Poirot did not pace now. He stood perfectly still in front of the hearth, hands clasped behind his back, the firelight flickering across the perfect curves of his mustache. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational, yet it filled the room as completely as a church bell. "Dr. Thorne, you are a man of science. You believe in cause and effect. Let us, then, apply the scientific method to murder." He raised one small gloved finger. "First, the poison. Potassium cyanide mixed with digitalis. Only a physician who had treated Sir Reginald for angina would know the exact dose required to delay convulsions by precisely 180 seconds. 180 seconds, Monsieur Dame, is the time it takes a tall man in a heavy overcoat to walk from this room to the far end of Platform 3, light a cigarette under the clock, be seen by the newspaper boy, and walk back again, calm as you please. A second finger. Second, the glove. The tear is on the left palm, not the back. A defensive tear. Sir Reginald, in his final agony, seized his murderer's wrist with his dying strength. Fibers of Harris tweed were found beneath his fingernails. The same tweed as your traveling suit, Doctor. The same suit you packed so carefully in the suitcase you never intended to take. A third finger. Third, the body. Cyanide victims do not die neatly. They thrash, they foam, they fall. Yet Sir Reginald sat almost regal in death, because you, Doctor, held him upright until the end. Held him so tightly that the left glove split. Held him out of a terrible, misplaced compassion so that he would not disgrace himself in his final moments. A doctor's reflex. Thorne made a sound, half sob, half snarl. Poirot's voice softened almost kindly. "You came here at 11:47 exactly. You had telephoned Sir Reginald from the call box outside the George and Dragon at 11:31, telling him his wife had collapsed at the hotel and begging him to come at once. He trusted you. He always trusted you. You prepared the tea yourself, 1 cup, 2 lumps, a little milk, exactly as he liked it. You watched him drink. You waited. When the convulsions began, you caught him, held him, whispered that it would be over soon. Then you straightened his tie, settled his hat beside him, and walked away. 180 seconds later, the newspaper boy greeted you under the clock. You bought a packet of players and asked the time, perfectly calm, perfectly innocent. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was unbearable. But there is one thing more. The most damning of all. Poirot reached into his pocket and drew out a small, stoppered bottle, half full of colorless crystals. This morning, Doctor, when Inspector Japp searched your rooms, he found this hidden behind the cistern in your lavatory. Pure potassium cyanide, enough for 20 murders. Your fingerprints are on the bottle, and inside the stopper, caught in the wax seal, a single fiber of Harris tweed, from the cuff you wore when you filled it. Thorne stared at the bottle as though it were a living thing. I kept it for emergencies, he whispered. Emergencies such as murdering the man who was about to destroy you? Poirot asked gently. Thorne's head dropped. He found the embezzled accounts. He was going to the police on Monday. 25 years of reputation gone. My wife, my daughters, I begged him. He laughed, said men like me belonged in the gutter where we started. I saw the sugar bowl on the table. I don't remember deciding. I only remember thinking that if he died suddenly, the books would never be opened. He looked up, eyes streaming. I didn't want him to suffer. That's why the digitalis. I swear that's why. Lady Eleanor made a small, contemptuous sound. You fool, you played my husband's game better than he ever did. Poirot turned to her. And you, madam, played a different game. You knew of the embezzlement. You encouraged Thorne. You lent him your digitalis tablets and told him exactly how many grains would delay the poison. You forged the lavender letter to implicate Clara. You planted the cloakroom ticket on Langston. You even arranged for the blonde wig to be found, knowing it would never fit your own dark hair. You wished Thorne to hang and yourself to walk free with the fortune and the sympathy of England. Lady Eleanor lifted her veil at last. Her face was beautiful, cold, and utterly without remorse. "You will never prove any of it, Monsieur Poirot." "Perhaps not in a courtroom," Poirot agreed. "But truth is not always measured by verdicts. You will live with the knowledge that you turned a desperate man into a murderer. And that, madam, is a sentence longer than any judge can impose." He turned back to Thorne. "Doctor, the jury will show you mercy, I think. A man of your age, your distinction, driven to despair by a tyrant. But mercy is not absolution. You will carry Sir Reginald's death to your own grave." Thorne nodded, broken. "I already do." Poirot stepped back. The drama was over. Japp signaled the constables. "Elias Thorne, I charge you with the willful murder of Sir Reginald Hargrove." As Thorne was led away, Clara Beaumont began to weep. Quiet, hopeless tears. Langston stubbed out his cigarette with shaking fingers. Wilkins stared at the floor, ashamed to meet anyone's eyes. Lady Eleanor rose, magnificent in her defeat. "You have your killer, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "Enjoy your little triumph." She walked past him without looking back, the scent of Je Reviens lingering like a ghost. Poirot watched her go, then turned to the empty chair where Sir Reginald had died. "Enjoy?" he murmured. "Non, madame. There is no enjoyment in watching human beings devour one another. Only sadness." He bowed slightly to the chair, a courtly gesture to the dead. Then he buttoned his overcoat, adjusted his hat to the perfect angle, and walked out into the fog, leaving the waiting room to its silence and its memories. Behind him, the fire gave one final pop and died. The case was closed. The railway station clock struck 5. Somewhere a train whistled for the night mail and the world moved on. Chapter 10. Resolution and Farewell. The fog lifted just before dawn on the following day, as though it too had grown weary of the drama and wished to be gone. Ashford Station lay quiet under a pale, reluctant sun, the rails gleaming like scars across the frost-whitened marshes. The waiting room had been swept clean, the blood-specked glove and the poisoned sugar bowl removed to Scotland Yard's Black Museum. Only the faint smell of coal smoke and bitter almonds lingered, like the memory of a bad dream. Hercule Poirot stood on platform 1, valise in hand, waiting for the 7:42 to Charing Cross. His overcoat was buttoned to the throat, his gray suede gloves immaculate, his mustache a masterpiece of symmetry. Inspector Japp stood beside him, hands deep in the pockets of his trench coat, looking as though he had not slept in a week. "Well, Poirot," Japp said at last, "it's over. Thorne confessed everything in writing before breakfast. Signed it in a steady hand, too. Said he wanted no trial, no speeches, just the rope and silence." Poirot gave a small, sad nod. "He is a man who has already hanged himself in his heart, mon ami. The rope will be only the full stop." A porter trundled past with a barrow of mailbags. Somewhere a signal clanged, and the air filled with the comfortable, oily smell of steam. "And Lady Eleanor?" Poirot asked quietly. "Gone back to Belgravia, took the midnight Pullman. Sat alone in her compartment the whole way, veil down, not a word to anyone. The maid says she burned a pile of photographs in the grate when they arrived. Nothing left but ashes." Poirot gazed along the empty platform. Ashes, always ashes, a marriage reduced to cinders, a reputation, a life. And for what? A little more money, a little more power, a little more pride. Japp cleared his throat. "Victor Langston's resigned from the board, sailing for New York next week. Says he'll start again in steel, Pittsburgh this time. Clara Beaumont's gone to her sister in Torquay. Gave notice this morning. Quiet girl. Won't ever trust a man again, I shouldn't think. And Wilkins? Bound over for the thefts. Got off light. He's keeping his job. Station master put in a word. Says Wilkins has a wife and 5 children. Sometimes the law must be human. Poirot smiled faintly. You grow sentimental, Jap. Not sentimental, just tired. The 742 glided in, brakes hissing, steam curling along the platform like white cats. Poirot picked up his valise. You will not ride with me to London? Jap shook his head. Paperwork. Always paperwork. Besides, I've had enough of trains for a while. Poirot climbed the steps, then paused on the platform of the carriage and looked back. Tell me, mon ami, do you remember what Sir Reginald's last words were? The station master found a note in his waistcoat pocket, scribbled in pencil as the poison took hold. Jap frowned. Something about the railway children, wasn't it? Didn't make sense. Poirot's eyes were distant. It makes perfect sense. In 1915, during the war, Sir Reginald, then merely Mr. Hargrove, speculated in railway shares using money embezzled from a charity for soldiers' orphans. The orphans were nicknamed the railway children in the press. He ruined hundreds of lives to make his first million. Dr. Thorne knew. He had treated some of those children. That was the real secret Sir Reginald carried to his grave. The embezzlement Thorne feared exposure of was only the latest chapter in a very long book. Jap stared. You mean Thorne killed him for justice? No. Thorne killed him for survival, but in his heart perhaps he believed it was justice. Men are adept at dressing murder in noble clothing. The guard raised his flag. Poirot touched the brim of his hat. Au revoir, Jap. Next time you summon me from my retirement, choose a crime in summer, I beg you. Fog is bad for the mustache. Jap managed a tired grin. Next time I'll choose a nice, quiet bank robbery. No aristocrats, no poisons, no broken hearts. The train began to move. Poirot retreated into his compartment and took the seat by the window. As Ashford slipped away behind him, he watched the station grow smaller, smaller, until it was no more than a child's toy left on a table. He opened his newspaper but did not read. Instead, he gazed out at the passing Kentish fields silvered with frost and thought of the people he was leaving behind. Lady Eleanor, alone in her great house in Belgravia, burning photographs and memories, already planning the next act of her life. Victor Langston on the Atlantic, chasing a new fortune with the same ruthless charm. Clara Beaumont walking the windy promenade at Torquay, learning slowly how to breathe again. Tom Wilkins pushing his trolley, lighter by guilt but heavier by the knowledge that mercy is sometimes only another name for luck, and Dr. Elias Thorne in his cell at Brixton waiting for the day when a trap door would open and the long fall would end everything. The train gathered speed. Telegraph wires rose and fell beside the window like the slow heartbeat of the countryside. Poirot closed his eyes. In his mind he saw Sir Reginald Hargrove one last time. Not the tyrant, not the victim, but the young man he must once have been, standing on a platform somewhere, full of ambition and hunger, believing that the world was his to take. A man who had never understood that every track leads, in the end, to the same quiet station. Poirot sighed, a small, almost inaudible sound. Vanity, he murmured. All is vanity, and the little gray cells, they grow weary of it. The train whistled as it crossed a viaduct, a long, mournful cry that scattered rooks from the bare trees. London was drawing nearer, with its lights and its noise and its thousand new mysteries waiting to be born. Poirot opened his eyes, folded his newspaper with precision, and allowed himself the very smallest of smiles. Another case concluded. Another triumph for order over chaos. Another reminder that, in the end, even the cleverest murderer is only a man who forgot the timetable. The 742 thundered on toward Charing Cross, carrying Hercule Poirot away from Ashford Station and the crime that had, for one brief November night, turned an ordinary railway platform into a stage where pride, greed, love, and death had played out their ancient tragedy. Behind him, the marsh wind stirred the fog once more, gently, as though closing a book.